Glad to be here. So my name's Ted Pattison. I'm from the States. I work on the Power BI CAT team, along with my good friend Benny, who's here, hopefully to heckle me a little bit as we go through. No, I didn't deserve that. Okay, so we're going to talk about multi-language, building multi-language reports. How many people have been trying to do this, for more than a week? Have spent time trying to, okay, so there's a lot of people here. Again, see, this is an area that Microsoft doesn't invest as much as some other areas. Have you picked that up along the way? So somehow about 2 or 3 years ago, I was silly enough to put up my hand and say, I'll research this area and see what we can do, to basically help people build, reports that support multiple languages. Now, there's a lot of content. And I have a lot of content that I'm going to show you, kind of recorded content. But it's about 2.5 hours worth of stuff to take you through the whole track. So what I'm going to do is kind of get through, definitely the first two types of translations, which is metadata translations and report label translations. For the data translations, there's a lot of work there. And I think, what I'll do is kind of point you to some extra work. You like hands-on labs? I got great hands-on labs, if you want to get your hands dirty going through and kind of following my techniques as we go through here. Now, the good news is that, there are definitely internationalization and localization features built into Power BI, so you can build a single data set and report, that will render the report in, one of the 40-something languages, that are supported by Power BI. So what we've seen a lot in the past, is people using the old save as, create the English report, save as French, save as German, and then when it's time to change things, hopefully we'll change them the same way in all three places. So let's kind of put that to bed, never use that again. Now, I did my first pass at this material and published something in July of 2021. When I kind of look back at that, I kind of say, well, could have done better. And what happened is, between then and now, there are several features, that were released to Power BI that really kind of helped this story. And those things are the user culture function, is now GA in Power BI Premium. And we're going to see how that factors in. There's a lot more properties in the report designer that you can bind to a visual. So that's pretty key, to making this thing work. On the report, and remember, as we go through here, you're going to see that the report layout designer is completely ignorant of anything to do with translations. It's you in the data set and playing tricks. And so you being able to kind of bind something, to a measure in the report layout is going to be pretty key. And also when it comes to data translations, the introduction of field parameters, to me is a really big step forward to helping you build these, in Power BI Desktop. Now, the last piece here is that I built a tool, an external tool for Power BI Desktop called Translations Builder. And that's going to be a key part of, the guidance that I'm going to give you, is using this particular tool. Now, the other thing I want to show is that, I built this multi-language report. Let's see if I can, find this report here, just to kind of show what's possible. So here is, a report, where I have 6 different pages, and we can go to, different languages and see all 3 types of translations, working out. Even when it gets to the point here, that we have our months and days of the week, and I want to go through and, kind of look at different languages. So this is something that, I wanted to build so people could just say what's possible. And if you follow all my guidance, my hope is that you will be able to kind of build this type of report, that really kind of does the full translations into whatever languages that you want to support. Now, as we keep going through here, in this first section right here, I guess I have a cute little animation that goes through all the different languages. Now, a key thing to note is that we support translations at the data set level. And it was really analysis services that introduced translations. And since kind of Power BI is the evolution of that, it inherited this particular feature. But the report layout, is really ignorant of that. So what do we have support for translations? It's really data set objects. So think tables, columns, measures, hierarchies, and hierarchy levels. Those are the 5 types of objects. And then you have properties. So the thing that we're most interested in is the name of a table, or the name of a measure or a column. And that's what we call the caption property. So you're always going to supply translations, for the caption property, and maybe you want them for description. If you're having a data model and you're going to have other people building, reports on top of that. And then also display folders, are in, text that's shown to the user. There's also, 2 different levels. Are you trying to kind of build reports, that translate to different languages for the consumer? Or are you also trying to do it, for report designers, people who are in edit mode, which, there's a lot more that you have to do. So at the beginning of a project, I would document, am I trying to translate, for just consumers, or are we trying to take the next step and also do it, for, report editors? So I think descriptions and display folders would kind of fall into the latter category, not the former category. Currently, we require Power BI Premium. So if you have just a workspace in the shared capacity, what we call Pro, we don't have the proper plumbing. That was not a trick for Microsoft to get your money. It was just kind of the plumbing layer. And I think what we'll see over the next year is kind of some advances in, our plumbing, so that what I'm going to show you here, will work across, all workspaces, not just today where we have only support in premium. And, definitely the last thing to see is that the report designer is completely ignorant of translations. Anytime you go to the report, designer and you hard code in text, that will never support translation. So it's always something that's in the data set, that you need to use to support translations. Now, let's kind of talk about how reports load. When a report loads in Power BI, the Power BI service, starts building a context for the current user. And so what it will pick up is both the language of the current user and the locale. Whether the user's, in the United States versus Great Britain versus Spain versus Argentina, something like that. And so we have this identifier, which we call a culture. ENUS, ENGB, ES-ES. And that basically, just brings both elements. So every time a report loads, the Power BI service is going to build this cultural identifier. And by default, it will take the browser settings. And what you're able to do, if you want to influence that, which often we have to, we can use the language parameter, in the report URL. Or if you're using Power BI embedding, you have full control when you load a report to load with any particular, language or, locale that you'd like. Now, when you kind of look at that table below, we now have a supported DAX function called user culture, which really factors into, some of the new advancements of how we're going to, implement translations. And in particular, if I look at user culture and I take the first 2 characters, I'm going to get EN or ES or DE. So what, we kind of see is that there's this pattern. Some people might take the entire cultural identifier, in the current, release of my tool. I'm just looking at the first 2 characters to kind of take the language. And so what we're able to do, is to build measures, that dynamically do the translations on the fly. What language do you speak? Okay, you get English, you get French, you get German. And so this is the type of, code that we can write, or hopefully this is the kind of code that can be generated for us automatically behind the scenes. And that's one of the things that, we're going to show that the tool is able to do. Now, when it comes to formatting dates and numbers, let's get that out of the way. And that turns out to be fairly easy if you have the right locale. So when it comes to translating language, you might have to write a measure saying, if that, then this, if another case, then that. However, with locale, generally we don't do that. We just basically make sure that, our columns and measures have the correct format string. And visuals basically can see what's the user's locale. Okay, I see that. What's your format string short date? And it will automatically give you something different, for ENGB and ENUS. So once again, we don't have to worry as much, about locales. And the format string you pick will definitely have some influence. So you could pick a format string that hard codes, kind of the date as far as, where the day and month go. So some format strings, won't be affected by locale, but most are. And, testing with the different locales that you're using, is the best way to kind of make sure that you get, the correct dates. If I come back here and we look at kind of this first page right here, you can kind of see as we're going through, and in my demos, and if you do my lab, up here in the top, I kind of show the cultural identifier. Not that you would ever do that in a real application, but as you're learning, you can see this is ES-US, so that's the date that we get. Okay, well, let's try French over here, and all we're doing is kind of switching the second part, from US to FR, and the date automatically changes. Okay, we go over to Japanese, and once again, you can kind of see, that, it's really the JP here that's influencing the visual in combination with the format string short date, to give you, what you'd like. Okay, so once again, you can just see that, the locale plus the format string, is what affects how you're going to see the formatting for both dates and numeric fields. Okay, now we're still in the introduction section. A couple more slides here. And what we have to do when we want to create, reports that support multiple languages is understand 3 different types of translations, and the way that we deal with them, is all different. So what we're going to do, is break down these 3 types. So there's metadata translations. So I have table names, column names, measure names. And what's kind of nice is that support for this is just built in, and these turn out to be the easiest. We have report label translations, and that's when you just have a report title, or just, a button with a caption, text that's not associated with the dataset object. And to some degree, you're kind of on your own to figure out, how to do that. And kind of the advances in us having user culture and being able to write measures, and then being able to attach those measures, to, whether it's a card visual, or I really like the shape visuals, just taking a rectangle shape, and that to me supports more formatting options. And then there's data translations, and what we're going to see is that the first 2 types are always going to be required. But the third type isn't always required, especially if I build a software product and we install it, for one client in Spain and one client in France and one client in Japan. Well, I want, the metadata translations, the report label translations, to work correctly. But as far as the data, the Spanish people are just putting it in Spanish, and the Japanese people are just putting it in Japanese, so you don't really need data translations. It's when there's one audience that speak different languages that's looking at one database, that's when we need data translations. So that's something you do at the beginning of your project, is determine, do we need this, yes or no? And you don't do it if you don't need it, because it's a lot of work. Okay, as we go through here, I'll assume that if you have questions or complaints, you'll just raise your hand and speak up. Okay, as we go through here, let's kind of start with, what metadata translations look like. So things like column names. So things like the names of measures that you'd show in a card visual. These are examples of what metadata translations are. And once again, they're the ones that, provide support out of the box. So in general, I find they're the easiest ones to implement. There's report label translations. So think of, the button captions and the report title that you have up top of each page. Those are things where there's no built-in support, so you have to kind of come up with some type of innovative way. My guidance, has one of these innovative ways. Certainly, there's not one solution. There are many different solutions, and, I'm going to provide one possibility. And, it's going to build on top of this idea of using user culture and being able to, have a measure that dynamically decides, what text that you should get, given what it sees in the language that's part of user culture. Okay, and finally, there is data translations. So just the name of products, the name of categories. They're going to show up in tables. They're going to show up in legends, in axes and things like that. If you're going to use slicers, once again, what's in the slicer? It's text values from the underlying data source, so once again, that kind of falls into the data translations. And I think I'll be able to speak to this just a bit at the end, but the field parameter, is the key in my guidance as far as, how to implement these data translations. Now, the next thing is we got two different styles. You might have something where we want to keep it easy. There's no need to have multiple reports for a data set. So we'll just have a PBIX that contains, both the data set and the report. And I think some of you have probably, seen that, maybe we have different teams, one team building the data set, the other team's building the report, or for versioning reasons, we decide to split them out. And so no matter which of these techniques you're going to use, the guidance is going to work fine because there's things that you do to the data set to put in things like measures. And then when we're creating the reports, we bind to these measures. So either of these, styles will support, what I'm going to tell you in terms of guidance of how to, build multi-language reports. Okay, at the end of this section here, this is the end of the intro, I just want to point out that there is a lot of material, homework as it were, that I'm giving you after this session. So I have this 50-page Word document that kind of explains a lot of the concepts and kind of steps through the guidance. There is a hands-on lab, that's going to take you through, everything soup to nuts, including the data translations part. I think probably 2 to 3 hours would be a good estimation of what it would take you to kind of work through this. And, what you'll need is Power BI Desktop, and then this tool that I'm about to show you, which is called Translations Builder. I also have, a video playlist, which is up on YouTube. Once again, probably the first 3 or 4 videos here will be the same thing that I'm presenting here, but I'm not going to be able to get all the way into the last parts. So these videos hopefully will kind of help you if you want to kind of get the guidance or just kind of see a video all the way through. Okay. Questions so far? How could there be any questions? It's all so clear. Okay, well, let's kind of start working with metadata translations. Now, the first problem is that Power BI Desktop provides absolutely no help, doesn't understand, what metadata translations are. So what we need, is an extra tool. So you can use Tabular Editor. And my very first weekend working at Microsoft in 2020, I was pulled in to work on this project. I had no idea about anything that I'm talking about here today back then. And so I just used Tabular Editor, and let's go up into the model, copy and paste, copy and paste, copy and paste. And I spent a couple 8-hour days of nothing but, using the clipboard, to implement this. So Tabular Editor works. Tabular Editor also allows you to write scripts, which makes things a lot, easier, as far as you can automate. You could, also use the same API that Tabular Editor uses, which is the Tabular Object Model, what we call TOM, or, you can use Translations Builder. And I basically have 2 versions of Translations Builder. The one that I built and published in 2021 in the summer, my idea behind it was, let's build something for developers to show them what they can do and they can make their users happy. But I really didn't see much traction on the developer space. So the second time around, my goal was really to kind of forget about developers. You want to take it and run with it, that's great. But I really need to kind of make this tool, user-friendly. People who are building the reports in Power BI Desktop, they begin, to be my primary audience, for using this particular tool. Now, there is a, let's see if I go back here, and, there is a seminar I run called Power BI Dev Camp. So if you go to github.com, Power BI Dev Camp Translations Builder, you're going to find this. And once again, all the things that I was talking about before, I link to here. There's an installation guide, how to install this tool. There's an MSI file to get up and going on it. Okay, now, one of the things about Translations Builder, let's go ahead, and I've already got the thing installed, so I'm going to go ahead and fire it up. And the idea is that this is your sidekick to Power BI Desktop. If I go down here and I kind of take a look at my data model, and then we take a look at this, it's going to go through your data model, and any table, measure, column, or hierarchy level, or display folder, is going to show here, and give you the ability to see the translations. Now, as we start working with this, notice that anything that's private, we're not going to show in here. The assumption that if it's private, it's not going to be on the report, and we don't need to bother translating it. So that's kind of logic that is built into the tool itself. Now, the idea is that this thing works with the underlying Power BI data set. Now, the way it works is that when we fire up an external tool, it's able to make a connection to the data set, and through the XMLA endpoint protocol, it's able just to work on that local data set. One thing I want to call out is that currently, the tool that I built is going to only work against Power BI Desktop. There is the possibility to extend the tool to connect to a data set, that lives in the Power BI service. I haven't added that in. And there's this issue that if you, program Tom against Power BI Desktop, and then you program Tom against what's in the service, you can do a lot more in the service. You can do a lot of programming in the service, and if you try to use it in the Power BI Desktop, it won't work. So I decided just to kind of stick with the subset of what works in Power BI Desktop. Point being is then you have a PBIX file with all your translation work, that you can check into source control, and you have a version of that. Okay, lots of other possibilities, but there's some kind of choices that I made, that might affect, how you use the tool. Now, once again, it loads the data model, and it only loads things that are, visible to the user, that are public. And what you can see is that for every translation, I've got this way to identify them, by what is the object type, what is the property, and probably it's all going to be caption, unless you want to use some of those other properties inside. And then we always have this default language. And that's where, just the underlying, before we even get to translations, your table has a name, your measure has a name. So that's kind of seen as what, the default language and locale. And for mine, they're going to be ENUS. Okay, now, when we want to add languages, let's go back here, and maybe I'll start doing a little bit more demo-wise. So I kind of wanted to make things easy, so we're able to add a language. Let's say we'll start with adding Spanish, and we'll add that in. And one of the things that I wanted to do is just abstract away this idea of reading and writing translations and give you a grid. I'm working with Excel as far as I can tell. And, as I created the second version, wanted to make it, more user-friendly, what I decided to do, is kind of just try to make it, such that users, really could just, work with it, make it very easy. Now, because I'm not the best Spanish speaker, I'll do a quick little trick here to kind of import this. So let's say that now I kind of have my first language that's built in. Now, one thing to remember is that when you use, a external tool, the external tool can read and write to the data set, but it can't tell Power BI Desktop to save your changes to disk, to the PBIX file. So as you make your changes, remember to come back here and click this right here. Now, I've got one language, which, one secondary language, which is Spanish. Let's go ahead and test that out. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back here. I'm going to go ahead and publish, this. And when you want to test out translations, at least metadata translations, report label translations, you really can't do it in Power BI Desktop. You have to publish to the service. Now, in our case right here, I've got this DevCamp Labs. Let's go ahead and publish this here. And so, once I have published this, what you're going to see is that, let's go back, over to the service. So let's go back over here. I'm going to go ahead and, load this. And at first, it's English. But now, we're just going to come right to the end of the URL. we're going to put in question mark and language equals ES-ES. And, once we get that right, hit the enter key. If you forget the question mark or something, it will just kind of delete what you put in there. So just kind of keep putting in there till you get it right. And now that we've done that, we should see the metadata translations. So look at the column names here. Look at the measure names here. Even some things, such as a visual title might change. If you have the default visual title, it's all driven through metadata, so that will work fine. But you can see things like the report label translations aren't working yet. The other thing I would really kind of encourage you to do is you don't want to keep going back to the address bar and typing that in there. So as I'm working through here, one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and say, okay, now this is my Spanish version. Let's go ahead, click OK. So now as I'm doing my testing, I can kind of quickly come back and go back and forth between these. Okay, now, because we're a little pressed for time here, let's go ahead and kind of move to the next section. So next thing we're going to look at is generating machine translations. So the whole idea of machine translations, even though they might not be your ultimate, endpoint in getting the results you want, they can be beneficial. So one of the things my tool has done is integrate with Azure Translator Service. And the idea is that you can automatically generate machine translations, for all the things that you need. And, as I said, quite often that's not going to be the endpoint that you want, but you want to get going with testing. Some companies might have some type of, legal issue, where the government can sue them for tens of thousands of dollars a day. And certainly having a report with machine translations to stop the bleeding, is better than nothing. So once again, you might find that you have no use for that, but you also might find them to be valuable. Now, what I'm going to kind of leave to you, or looking at the other documentation, is how to go and get a translator key. But once we have a translator key, let's go up here to configure services. And let's say that before, when you just install this, what you're going to see is that there's no support for generating this. So it's going to be up to you. Have an Azure subscription, go generate one of these, and you can actually generate one of these services that's absolutely free, one per Azure subscription, and you get a certain number, I think you get something like 2 million characters per month that you're able to translate. Okay, but now if I come back here, let's add that back in. Okay, so now let's go back up here, and let's say that I want to add a couple more languages. So this time we'll add French, we'll add German. Let's go ahead and add those inside there. Now, with this, let's say that I go to French, and I go ahead and we go through here, so we can add things inside. Let's say that here I have some things, and notice that I have a fill, all empty translations. And the idea is that you've kind of added most. You just want to fill the ones that are empty, so it's not going to touch these. But if I came down here and I go to German, I say generate, it's going to override everything. Or if I say generate all translations, it's going to do the same thing, for everything. Okay, so now that we've got that, let's go back here, to Power BI Desktop, and let's go through this same dance where we click OK. And now we're going to go ahead and save our changes. Now let's go ahead and publish our changes. Okay, and so now I should support, 3 secondary languages, in addition to the default language of English. Okay, so let's go ahead and test this. Great. If we go back now, to our report that we're working on, and, before we had Spanish, okay, Spanish is working. I can see that. Now let's kind of go back and FR, is that going to work? Okay, and then we got French, in the places they should be. Let's go ahead, and once again, I just kind of like to create these browser bookmarks as I go along the way. Okay, wrench instead of French, that's good enough for me. And then let's go back up here and DE. Okay, so now I've got, the 4 different languages, and one more time, we'll come back here and we'll have, German. Okay, so what we kind of seen here, with the machine translations, it just gives you a quick way, to get your first round of translations. You're probably going to need to have humans that know each language, to get involved eventually. But once again, you want to get reports up, begin your testing, just kind of see, are my layouts correct? So the machine translations, can help you with that. Okay, I think I've been through that section. And a couple other things, I guess. If I go back here and, let's say that, I have these, and I come back here and I take a column and I double click on the column, it's just going to kind of do the translations across that. So once again, I'm just trying to make things that, as I was doing translations, what are the things that if I have to do manually is going to be tedious and take forever, and how can I automate that with code? So that's been my goal, in creating this particular tool. Now, the next thing we want to look at, is how to implement report label translations. And I'll be the first one to admit that there are many possible answers, and I'm going to give you, one possible solution. You'll find other people have other solutions that work perfectly well. There's reasons I like what I'm going to show you here. But we'll kind of start with report labels, don't have any, associated data set object behind them, so they can't support translations. But they're a key part of any report. How could you really have a report that didn't have kind of just literal text that wasn't associated with a data set object? The report heading, page headings, button captions. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to rely, on writing code in DAX, that uses the switch statement, with user culture. However, what we're going to see is that there's a technique where we're not going to have to write this by hand. Now, there's also, before we even get into, the solution here, there are things that we do not do. So having a text box or a button and hard-coding text values in the report designer, that will never translate. Remember, the report layout designer knows nothing about translations or localization. Also, if I go back to, this report here, I just use the default title of a visual. Looks great. Over here, I hard-coded a title in, and that doesn't translate. So once again, you can't hard-code any text in. So sometimes, just leave a visual alone, it will do the right thing. Other times, it doesn't. And that's what I'm kind of trying to show there. That if you just leave the title with its default, it's built dynamically, sales revenue by country and year. And then if you provide translations for those other languages, it will automatically fill in and do the right thing. So I guess, one of the pieces of advice is don't touch visual titles, just kind of leave them. And, if you don't like them, either don't show the title, or you're going to have to kind of see what we're going to do here to kind of get the, that in. Now, Translations Builder is going to use this strategy, which is called the localized table strategy. Now, given our time is pretty limited, I might just kind of go ahead and demo through this. So let's kind of start by going back and, inside of Power BI Desktop, what I'm going to do here is, let's kind of show the data model. Now, when you're using this tool, there's nothing that you're going to have to do in Power BI Desktop. I'm just showing you Power BI Desktop behind the scenes so you can kind of see what's going on. Now, what you're going to do is come down here, and you're going to create something called the localized label table. So I'll go ahead and choose that. It's got this little dialog that comes up saying, hey, you've just created something that's got a lot of concepts behind it, and if you click yes, it's going to take you to our documentation and kind of walk you through kind of the same thing I'm telling you here. But the idea here is that it automatically builds this table called the localized label table. So what's the key concept? Where do we support translations for data set objects? So for each report label, if I just create a data set object, I have something to hang my translations off of. Okay, so that's kind of the first key that we have inside there. Now, with this particular tool, you can also see that when we create these report label translations, we just merge them together with the metadata translations. So I said there's lots of other techniques that I've seen that work perfectly well. But what I like about this technique is that everything gets contained in the data set. Everything is, done the exact same way. Now, let's say that I come back up here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to say add labels. And notice I add 3 labels: my report title, my button caption. And so let's say I had another report label, Bob. You can add them in easily. Or when we come back here and I say add report label, let's go into advanced mode. Let's delete all that junk that I don't want. At the same time, if I come back here, and so what I am going to do is eventually let's get to the top here. Let's get to translations builder. I want to go to the multi-language hands-on lab. And everything I'm doing here, the hands-on lab can step you through. But if I go to creating report label translations, the one thing I want to do here is inside the lab, what are the different labels? So what I wanted to do is make it so that you can just either type the labels here, or if you have a text box, you can upload from a simple text file, and now we'll add labels. And now we've got our labels inside here. Okay, now because I have this, fill all empty translations, once again, now my report labels are being kind of populated and managed the exact same way as my metadata translations. So now that we've done that, we've done the first part. Now, there is 2 different aspects. So this is just a table that's behind the scenes. Notice that it's hidden. So if you go into report, view, you're never going to see that. So what we need to do is we need to create this second table. And so back here, this time what we're going to do is we're going to come back here, and after you've done all your translations work, you're going to say generate translated localized label table. And so now this table gets generated, by looking at this other table here. We create this, and this is what you're going to use, in report design view here. So the idea here, is one more time, let's say that back here, and let's make it so we can see these just a little bit more here. We'll come back here. We'll, add a new label to the localized label table. And of course, it will be leather pants. And, now that we've added that, you can see that these 2 tables are out of sync. So, you're going to keep coming back here. Each time you make translations, any kind of edit, you're going to come back here to synchronize these 2. And now that we've done that, let's go back here. And now what you're going to see, is we have these measures that have been created on the fly. And with leather pants, looks like I forgot to do one thing. Okay, so once again, let's go back here and kind of make that change quickly. There is leather pants. I forgot to do that. Let's go ahead and double click so I can go through, fill those in, and one more time we're going to come back here and kind of rebuild that localized label table. And now that we've done that, you can see that, we have leather pants. Note that when I created the labels, I have a name, and then this is 2 tables and kind of 2 different measures for each label. You can't name 2 measures the same thing. So everything just gets the name label appended to it. Okay, so now that we've got that, let's go back here. And so I would really need to do this across all 3 pages. For this demo, I'll just do page 1. But the idea here is that we have this shape. So we're going to go click on this particular shape right here. We're going to go to style. And if I go to text, there's the offender right here. Hard-coded text, will never translate. So now what we're able to do is kind of move back. And now let's go in what is the report title. It is the product sales report label. And so let's go ahead and switch, these particular 3 buttons. So we now want to bind to the measure for the sales summary. And now for, the sales by category. And so one more button here to go. And this is now going to be for the sales over time. Let's go ahead, click OK. Okay, let's test things out. So one more time, it's save your report. Let's go ahead and hit publish. And as I publish this report, let's go ahead and kind of check things out. And I've already got my report bookmarks in there. Okay, and as soon as we're done publishing here, we should be able to go and test our work. So back here, let's go ahead and test Spanish. And what we should see here is that now you can see my report labels translated to Spanish, and also in French, the derivation of the French language for my demo, and then also in German. So the whole idea of kind of making it easy to add labels, push them into the data set, and then once again, there's a lot of work that I'm doing behind the scenes to abstract away dealing with that, but hopefully kind of see the big picture of how this makes it easy to use. My last comment is I've seen a lot of people implement report translations in a very efficient and reliable way, but they implement metadata translations like I showed you, but then they have a separate CSV file or some other thing where they have the report label translations, and now they have their translations in two different places in two different formats. So I'd argue that this just makes things a little easier to maintain since all your translations are able to live in a single place. Okay, so now that we've been through that, there's two more things that we have to look at here, and let's go to this section right here. So when you use machine translations, they have some benefits. But quite often they're just not going to cut it, for a production application. So you might have a case where a Power BI desktop author, someone like Benny, knows 6 different languages and can do all the work themselves. But you got someone like me, that knows English. I know 20 programming languages, but not a single other spoken language. So I need to kind of integrate, other humans, that have the expertise, in translation to do the work. So I wanted to kind of add some aspects into Translations Builder, to deal with that. So I have this notion of a translation sheet. And the idea is that you have this grid. Looks like an Excel spreadsheet. Can we not just export it so we have a file that we can, hand off to one of these human translators? And then the human translator can, do that actual work and feed it back and put it back into the system. So round tripping, to the translator and back, I wanted to, support with this idea of a translation sheet. So let's say that, let's go back to our tool here. And you see that, we have this one section for exporting. So let's say that I have a Spanish translator. So now I'm going to say export a single translation sheet. Note that we have this, do you want to open this file in Excel right after you generate it, yes or no? So we'll go ahead and choose that. And what you can see here is that it kind of creates this particular file. And the idea is a human translator, should treat the, first 4 columns as read-only, but they're going to go down and, either approve the machine translation, or come up with a better replacement, save the file, send it back, and we're going to be able to import it, into the system. In addition to that, note that with Translations Builder, we have configuration settings, for an inbox and an outbox. So you start with the outbox. That's the things you're going to send out to translators. They do their work, they send them back to you. So we also have export all translations. So here's a file I could send to Benny, and he could just do it. But generally this is going to be for backing up or just kind of somehow saving off all your translation work in a single CSV file. One note is currently my export format is CSV. So one of the issues there is you can't have commas. But I would suspect over the next couple months we'll add a JSON serialization format, just to kind of solve a lot of the problems that you have when you deal with CSV. But CSV sure is easy for open Excel, make changes, and send it back to me. So that is a fairly appealing aspect. But I think some, companies would prefer, a more robust format like a JSON format. Now, let's say that I have these, and what you can see is, I've generated these two different files. Let's go take a quick look at those. And, as I look at these inside here, let's go back to C. And in C, we have Dev Camp Labs, and there's my outbox. Okay, just for fun, let's do this. Let's take these two different files here and move them from the outbox, to the inbox. And also, let's go up and open this. And, just for, no good reason, let's go ahead and make a couple changes here and hit save. So as I do this, and the translators made these changes, the idea is that someone could say import, take this Spanish translation sheet, add them in there, and you can see the changes. You can also see that this import can deal with a single language translation sheet or what I'll call the master translation sheet. So if you import the master, it's just going to overwrite those changes. Let's say that we also, had someone who come through and deleted the secondary language of French by mistake. Hey, no problem. I've got it in the backup master translation sheet. So in my first version of this tool, it was something that if you imported something and we saw something we didn't understand, it just broke. But now I kind of saw there's a lot of benefits, to, being more adaptive. So running out of time here, so what I want to do is go through a couple of these slides to get to kind of the key points here. When we import translations, one of the things that we can also do now, is do the import, to a brand new project. And the idea is that, it will kind of bring in things that might already be there. So the logic that I built, into the import is include metadata translations for any dataset object that exists. However, if it doesn't exist, just ignore it and keep going. Add secondary languages, so you just kind of saw that demo. But the other key point here is add the localized labels table if there's one or more localized labels, and add the localized labels. So one of the key propositions here is, let me get back to Power BI Desktop here. And once I get back to Power BI Desktop, let's create a, come on, Power BI Desktop. Let's go down here. Let's go ahead and choose new. And I got 2 more minutes. Okay, so if I come back here and now brand new project, let's go ahead and just import the translations here. Let's go back to our master. Let's import it. And if I had data set objects that matched up, they would be brought over. But you can also kind of see, that, one of the things I kind of thought about was, wouldn't it be nice just to be able to have, a master translation sheet? And as I talk to people doing translations, that's great, but we really need some kind of enterprise level way to start kind of capturing the translations once and use it across any project. So that's one of the things I wanted to get inside here. Now, in closing, I told you I wasn't going to be able to get to the data translations. But the idea of data translations, just to give you kind of a 1-minute overview, is we use these things called field parameters. And a field parameter, is a filterable set of measures or columns. And so the approach is, in the underlying database, you don't just have a product name, but you have product name English, product name French, product name Spanish, and then you create a field parameter that has each of these in there. And so then you're able to filter the field parameter. And if you go through the lab, it shows you how to take a field parameter and add an extra language column to it. And then you can create as many field parameters as you want. One field parameter, for product name, one for product category in my lab. And then what you're able to do is create a languages table and then filter that table. And then there's going to be relationships that kind of, have it so that when you load a report, you can set a filter and just bring the English or French or German translations inside there. So once again, I provided all that extra information for you to kind of do some homework and get through and implement data translations. And, I'm happy to, take questions after this. I'm happy for you to, send questions to me, just ted.pattison@microsoft.com. So we're really looking for good success stories in the translation area. So I'm happy to engage, with companies that are doing this. And I know Translations Builder is not perfect. And I know there's going to be scenarios that it doesn't support. So I'd love to hear from you. And it's just going to be an ongoing process where hopefully I'll do a little bit more. So hopefully this was a valuable session to you. Thank you for taking your time and getting here at 9 in the morning. So thanks very much.